Hello, everybody. Welcome to the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. My name is Brooke Laird. I'm a Middlebury student class of 2022, and I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker. I'm joined today by Kat James, Middlebury class of 2014, and the founder of 400 Feet. Welcome, and thanks for joining us, Kat.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So this series explores a number of different professional roles involving data analytics. So to start off, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about 400 Feet and how your work involves data work.
Yeah, totally. So 400 Feet is a drone and data consultancy that works with researchers and NGOs and governmental organizations that want to leverage drone technology for spatial data collection, supply chain management, and visual storytelling. So of course, the data side really comes in that spatial data collection and kind of some of the supply chain management issues. And I work in a bunch of different sectors in kind of the social good space. So on more environmental projects like using drones for reforestation, or you can use. There's now really cool work happening with using drones for infectious disease research, among other things. So it kind of varies depending on the project.
Amazing. So I have a couple follow-up questions within this realm. So I was wondering, take me through the data analytics flow in your work, what the source data is, how do you collect it, how do you think this is unique in the fact that you have all this drone data that you're mostly focusing on, and then the types of methods and tools, and then maybe what even the end product of your work typically looks like.
Yeah, totally. So I'll just give you kind of one example. So let's say one of the projects I'm currently working on right now is a reforestation project. And so in this project, it kind of has two parts. So the first part of the project, we use a drone to collect spatial data to map a particular area. And so how that works, there are a number of different software platforms that you can use that you kind of can program in with the drone. So turn the drone on, you access one of these software, like there's Drone Deploy, Pix4D, Agrisoft, and you program your flight plan. And it basically tells the drone exactly where to fly and what types of images to collect. So you kind of program that, you send your drone up, it's flying over the area, and it's systematically collecting spatial data, photos, and LiDAR imagery of the area. So then what happens is, the software will then stitch together all of those images into a file. And then from there, I typically use ArcGIS to do the actual spatial analysis. And so what we're looking at in these types of projects is trying to identify where we want to do precision planting. And so we want to figure out okay, what is the current vegetation state? And so we're looking at, we're doing an analysis to figure out okay, do we need particular species in particular areas? Are there areas that we don't want to be planting because it's a body of water, or it's a cliff base or something like that? And so we want to take that out. So then once we conduct that analysis, then we load the data into a proprietary software that is associated with a different type of drone that's special for planting. And then it tells the drone exactly where to drop the seeds so that you can do precision planting. And so this is really cool because you can just plant trees it's way more efficient and cost effective and all that kind of stuff.
That's amazing. Super cool.
Yeah.
So is this a project that you have been contracted on to do, and then you will focus on a next project after this one is over? Or do you do multiple projects at once?
Yeah. So because I'm kind of designing, I want 400 Feet to be essentially a company of one, and I have contractors that I'll work on different projects. Mm-hmm. But my kind of ideal workflow is to have 2 to 3 projects happening at a time. And so with a lot of these projects, I'll come in for short periods of time throughout a 5-year period, for instance. But I think the interesting thing in the drone space, and maybe as it relates to data analytics, is that ultimately flying a drone is not that hard. you could probably learn how to do it in an afternoon. So what's cool in the kind of drone space is actually the value add that having the GIS and like data analytics background brings in. Because so a lot of my role, is setting up like the data collection plans or understanding like, okay, once we collect the spatial data, how do we analyze it? Because I think like, and on projects, I might work with other drone pilots that, they might be the person on the ground that's actually collecting that spatial data, and then they'll send it to me and I'll be the person analyzing. So it kind of depends on the project, but yeah, definitely the value add is those, spatial analytics skills.
Awesome. So going off of that, what do you find the most interesting part of your work, but also maybe the most challenging part of your work?
I think that the most interesting part of the work is definitely like just how much more effective interventions can be when you are able to apply data analytics to them. I think the challenge in all of the different projects I've worked on is collecting good source data is so challenging in this current role that I'm doing with drone data, as well as, other past data collection projects. When you're thinking about collecting drone data, you have to figure out like, okay, am I flying at the right time of day so that the light is good, so that the images I'm collecting, I can easily analyze. You have to think about like, okay, what is, does my drone's battery last long enough for a wide area, or like how I'm going to handle changing my batteries and creating my flight plan. And then like also, dealing with airspace regulations, or if you're in an area with the challenging topography, like how do you get your shots in a way that's legal, or applying for waivers and stuff like that.
How frequently or how many times does it usually take for you to get all the footage for one area that you need with the drone?
It totally depends on kind of the area, and then, what type of drone you're using. So like for smaller areas, you can use like quadcopter drones, which are smaller, but they have a shorter range. But then there are these like larger fixed wing drones that have can collect more data. And so those on projects, like I've had to like rent those before, because I only have the smaller quadcopter for myself.
Wow. Cool. I think so. My next question is, who do you interact with the most in the work that you've been doing? I think especially for you, someone who's doing a lot of different, more contracted type positions with a bunch of organizations. What types of organizations do you think you're working the most with, or the roles of individuals with whom you're directly interacting with at those places?
Yeah, totally. So I interact the most with kind of NGO nonprofits. They're a group that hires me a lot, as well as like small research teams. And then kind of within that, local community members is something that's essential to all of the projects that we're working on. And so, both, getting community buy-in for projects, but then also, you have to, in the drone space, there's a lot of regulation that you have to navigate. And so interacting with a lot of the governing bodies to make sure everything is legal, as well as like other drone pilots working in this space.
Cool. What do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities shaping the focus of your role today, especially as someone who's in more of this emerging field of data where there's all these new types of drone things coming out and the ways that you can use spatial data and imagery?
Yeah, I think, kind of on the opportunity side, like this is supposedly going to be like the decade of the drone, and like the industry is booming. And so it's really exciting because there's just rapid technological advances, and in both the drone and the data space, just what is possible is changing daily, and it's really exciting. I think at the same time, that definitely poses a challenge because it can be hard to stay on top of things because everything is rapidly changing. So like being able to learn fast enough and stay on top of, the latest technology and the latest, techniques for doing different things.
Cool. Another question that I had is, I feel like with the emergence of really big public open source data sets, maybe does that pose more of a challenge for your type of work? And do you see companies maybe being like, oh, we can do this ourselves with data that's available and imagery? Or do you think that that is a plus for you because you have access to those data sets and also all of the additional drone tools that you have?
I think it's a benefit more than anything, because I feel like it always helps to like supplement your data and provide more context. And like often in past projects, like, you know, your source data isn't just the data that you collect. You're often, you know, compiling it with all of this open source data. So kind of unrelated to this drone project, but, you know, something I'll probably get to shortly is like I worked on this project where I was collecting spatial data for the Ministry of Health in Ghana, and we're looking at like health outcomes and based on like where people lived. And in that case, like we had very targeted questions that we were trying to answer, and so we, you know, had, you know, our own data set that we were working off of, but then we needed all of this open source data and shape files about like, you know, the vegetation and where the cities were and the villages and the boundaries and, you know, economic data that like it really improved our analysis, but we feasibly like couldn't have collected all of that information. So I think it's like you know, I think that having more publicly available data just brings up the level of analysis that everybody can do.
Amazing. My last question in this section is, are there a lot of other groups that you found that are also doing small group level drone work, or do you feel like it's mostly you in this space and then a lot of other larger companies that are doing drone analytics?
Yeah, so there are like a number of people like me that are working as drone consultants. So it's definitely a thing, but it's pretty niche. I think that in like the actors within the drone space, so you have a lot of drone companies that are doing a lot of work that are actually like, you know, building the software and the hardware, and, you know, they certainly have data analytics teams within them, and so those are larger companies. But then like on the other side of things, there are a lot of independent operators using drone technology for other industries. So there's a lot in like inspection, in agriculture, in, you know, real estate, and so typically in those sectors, it might be, you know, smaller independent actors.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to see how the field continues to change and grow over time.
Yeah, definitely.
So the second segment of this interview that I have with you is hearing a little bit more about your pathway from being a Middlebury student and graduate to the career that you have now. So what I know about you is that you majored in geography and global health. And so I'm curious if you could just share a little bit more about the rest of your story.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, started as a geography major in global health, and I don't know, maybe to like take one step back to discussing how I landed there. So I was a Feb, and for part of my Febmester, I spent some time working at a hospital in Tanzania. I was like shadowing some doctors, and kind of during that experience, I realized that like, yes, I really wanted to go into international like global health, but I realized that I did not want to be pre-med and I did not want to be a physician, but I wanted to go more the public health route. And so that was really instrumental to my Middlebury experience, like having that knowledge. So as soon as I got to mid, I, you know, tried a bunch of different, you know, potential majors, you know, poli-sci, economics, geography, as well as, you know, was in GlobeMed and doing global health internships and stuff. So kind of when I started, like through my time at mid, I kind of realized like, okay, I want to work in public health, in global health, but I am more of a quantitative person than a qualitative person. So I was trying to figure out like, okay, how can I leverage quantitative skills in this space? And I originally thought that I would do something like get a joint MPH MBA. And I did a couple of internships, like working at a consulting firm, or I did one of the like summer business programs. And it became abundantly clear to me that I just did not want to go that path. Like the consulting business world just didn't really jive with me. But I realized that like what I really loved was working with data. And, through being a mid-geography major, I was like, wow, like I get all of these skills. And I don't know, it was easy for me to see the connection there. So when I graduated, I decided to go and get a dual master's in public health and information science. And there were kind of two main reasons why I made that decision. First off, like in the public health and international development space, it's really important to have a master's degree, which is funny because I feel like to do the actual work, it's not necessary, but like it's kind of a bureaucratic space and it's just like a box that you have to check on the applications. Caveat, I think that if you're somebody who is very technical and you're applying for like software engineer roles, that is not the case. But in a lot of the more like general program roles, you just have to have a master's degree. So I knew that. And so I went forth and did that. The other thing was that, being a geography major at Mid, I saw like, wow, like, having these GIS skills was so useful, but I recognized that like, GIS is just one skill set in a larger technical toolkit. And so I wanted to go and get a degree in information science to build out, my other technical skills. So I ended up going to the University of Michigan, completing my grad degree. From there, my first job out of college, I worked as a GIS analyst, or out of grad school. I worked as a GIS analyst on this USAID funded project for the Ministry of Health in Ghana. And so for this project, we were looking at, we're combining spatial data and social autopsies to understand why mothers and babies were dying in northern Ghana. And so social autopsy is like the idea that, in the United States, we have formal autopsies to understand, why people are dying or what the underlying cause of death were. In low resource settings, they will do kind of verbal autopsies. So they will talk to the family members and say like, she was bleeding a lot, or like to kind of understand like, oh, maybe the mother was hemorrhaging, or like, understanding the different causes of death. And then you take it a step further, social autopsy is you are talking to the family members to understand like what were the events that ultimately led to that death. So it could be something like, well, the woman was bleeding out after giving birth, but the main issue was that we didn't have any money to be able to like hire a car to take us to the hospital. Or we were trying to make it to the hospital, but the roads were washed out. And so she died on the way or something like that. So you're trying to figure out like, okay, this was like an infrastructure problem. So what we did is we created this data analytics dashboard for the Ministry of Health, where we combined that data with, we took a GPS point at the location of every death of the home village of where the mother or the baby died. And then we ran analytics on it. And what was fascinating to see that, as a geography major, this isn't shocking, but that, communities have different underlying causes of death. And in some areas, underlying cause of death was, it was, like I said, an infrastructure problem where like during half of the year, all these people were dying because they couldn't get to the health facility because the main road was washed out. So in that case, like the maternal health intervention is like, let's fix this road so people can get to the health facility. But in other cases, it was maybe like a drug distribution problem. So at a different facility, it's like, okay, the mother's getting there, but when she arrives, there's, no drugs to treat her. So she's, out of luck. Or in other places, it could be an issue where she got to the health facility, but there was no physician there. And so it was because, there was no place for them to stay or something. So anyways, that was cool in a data analytics perspective about being able to apply all these insights. So then the Ministry of Health was able to create targeted interventions. So like at one health facility, they built a place for the doctors and nurses to stay so that they could be closer to receive care. In other places, they did, road development, etc. So that was really long-winded, but a cool project where I got to leverage my GIS skills. And then, yeah, from that, I got put on another project where we were looking at, where I was also doing GIS, where I was looking at the efficacy of maternity waiting homes. And so maternity waiting homes are facilities that you build next to health facilities so that mothers can stay there in their last month of pregnancy. And the idea is that, if a woman is having to walk 6 hours to get to the health facility, if something goes wrong, if she's close and can stay in this, home, then she's more likely to receive care and improve health outcomes. And this is like in the international development space, this is a pretty like sexy thing to fund because it's tangible. It's like a building and you can see like, that's where my money went. So we got hired by the Gates Foundation to do this big assessment of all these facilities to look at where women were actually coming from. So looking at where their home villages were and to see who was actually, using these homes and were they reducing distance as a barrier to seeking care. So I worked on projects for that in Zambia and Liberia. Then at that point, I took a kind of hard left turn and I moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina for a year and a half. And I got a job working as a UX designer on a data analytics platform software. And that was pretty funny because I had, never worked as a designer before, but I actually, in that regard, like was able to leverage a lot of the skills that I learned in cartography. And like, I would say one of the courses that I have used the most in my post-grad life is cartography. Highly recommend that everybody take it. Having those like basic design skills, especially in like the UX field, is really critical, like UX UI. So, whipped out, I think there's like some sheet that you get in cartography with all the design principles and stuff. Definitely used that all the time, as well as just my underlying knowledge of data analytics and how it works. So that was kind of in my wheelhouse. But yeah, through that experience, I realized that I, in fact, did not want to be a UX designer. And instead, I wanted to work in product. So after that, I got a job working as a product manager for a company that creates software for frontline healthcare workers. And it was wild because as soon as I got that job, the pandemic hit and we landed all of these US states as our clients. So I led the US team as the product manager, and we designed a data collection software and like analytics platform for like New York State, like the state of Colorado, New Jersey, etc. So that was a really wild time. And then, yeah, as all of this is happening kind of on the side, I started flying drones as a hobby. And then I decided that I really loved it. So I went ahead and got, my professional drone license and launched my own company. That's a very long-winded story, wow. But here we are.
Amazing to hear about that process and all those changes. That's super cool.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of jump around, and especially in your 20s, to figure out, what aspects of different roles you like and you don't like, and it's just a learning process.
So when you graduated from Middlebury, did you go straight to Michigan after that?
I did.
What do you think after all of this is going to be next for you professionally?
At this point, I'm just kind of committed to continuing to grow my business. And one of the arms that I'm looking at, kind of trying to figure out how to build out, I'm really passionate about like how can we get more women and other underrepresented groups into the drone industry. I think currently only 7% of drone pilots are women. And as it's like a burgeoning space, I'd love to figure out how to get more females involved. So not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but that's definitely something that's on my radar.
Super cool. Amazing. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
The next section of questions that I have for you is focused on getting some career advice and some potential career advice for other students at Middlebury. So, given your experiences and what you know now, what advice can you give to current students at Middlebury to prepare themselves for entry into this career field or work with data analytics or spatial data in general?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I would say is that, it's important to be technical enough. I think that I remember when I was first applying to jobs, I was really stressed out about like, oh my God, I need to know like all of these programming languages and all of these statistical packages and like all of that. And the thing is like, you need to know enough that you can speak from informed place about the subject and about like what the underlying work that you're trying to do. But ultimately, whatever projects you get on, they're going to use a slightly different programming language or, a slightly different statistical package, and you'll learn it on the job. So don't feel like you need to be excellent at all of them. Like that, you will learn on the job, and like spending all of your time trying to be excellent at everything is not particularly productive. So on like, I think it's super helpful to be technical, but making sure that it's like you're focus on learning the underlying principles of what you're doing, not necessarily focusing on a particular package. Yeah, the other thing that I would say is just talk to a lot of people and feel comfortable doing informational interviews. Like I know I've had a pretty winding career path, as you may have heard, and like a lot of my jobs, like I think I've maybe only applied to like one of those jobs. I like through my career path, I've gotten almost all of my jobs through informational interviews. And I think realizing that there's some statistic that like 80% of jobs are never posted. And so it's much more fruitful for you to go figure out like who's doing cool work that I'm interested in and go talk to them, as opposed to spending all of your time on the job boards, like throwing out applications that people will probably never read. So it feels like pretty uncomfortable, but in my experience, like the most fruitful thing you can do is just get out there and network. And like what that actually looks like is, being comfortable, like going on LinkedIn and like cold reaching out to people and like have, do some research on the person, ask it like thoughtful questions. But people respond really well to that.
Amazing. Great to know. As someone who definitely is very stressed about, I don't know if my RStudio skills are as good as my skills in JavaScript, it's good to hear that some of those skills are just important to be technical enough and you don't need to master everything that you're doing.
Definitely not.
What types of experience do you think lend themselves to an entry point in this career field that you are in, which comes from so many different backgrounds and experiences that make up the drone work?
Yeah, I think definitely like your standard GIS analyst. I think also like UX UI work can kind of tie in there nicely, or like a basic like a data analyst role. Like all of those, like it feels like you kind of have to go through one of those three roles in order to get to the more nuanced positions. So they're definitely a good way to start. I think that like I feel really lucky that I started my career in kind of the research sector, because that's how I ended up landing some of those more interesting positions where like I was working in Ghana and doing that kind of stuff. Like I don't know if I had applied to like, a big tech company or something, I wouldn't have gotten to have those opportunities. But that said, I think that, if you work at a big tech company or something early in your career, you'll develop a lot of like foundational knowledge of what it's like to work in that space, and like, learning basic Scrum practices that, you kind of need if working in the tech space and how all the different parties interact. That's really useful information. And I kind of had to teach that to myself later on. So I don't know. I don't think that there's like one great way to do it.
Great. do you think are the best ways to find opportunities? I know that you mentioned how it's super great to get into the informational interview space and talk to people on LinkedIn. If for people who may not know exactly what they are, like exact focus, what do you think the best way is to maybe try and find what that focus could be?
Yeah. So I think I kind of have created a little system for myself throughout my career, but I think that in terms of finding a job, it's this combination between finding the right company and finding the right role for you. And like, you have to have both of them. You can be working in an amazing company, but if you hate the role, you'll be miserable. Or like you might love the role, but if the company doesn't resonate with you, you probably won't be happy. So it's finding that pairing. So what I found is first kind of identifying what is the industry that you want to be working in. And so for me, like I kind of knew that that was this like global health, international development sector. And then from there, figuring out like, okay, what are the, what's the role that I think that I want to be working in? And so, you know, most recently when I did this, I was looking at like product management roles. I thought that that was what I wanted to be doing. And so then I went and looked at like, okay, what are all the organizations that are working in this space that have that role? And, you know, finding like, I found like, you know, 20 kind of tech companies working in the global health international development space that had product managers. And so then from there, once I had all of those organizations, I just went out and contacted people that either worked there or used to work there. I think that one like pro tip is talking to people. If you're looking at a company or a particular role, it's really helpful to talk to people that used to have that role, because they will give you like the unfiltered version of what it's actually like. And so then you can ask more pointed questions to help try to figure out like, is this going to be a good match for me? And so, you know, you might hear somebody who recently left a company and they can be like, oh, like, you know, my department was horrible, but you know, this department was really great. So you should reach out to this person and they can kind of give you the inside tip. So that has been really effective. And then just figuring out like, through lots of conversations, kind of learning more about the space and then figuring out if it's going to be a good fit for you. And it's totally fine that you might, you know, it's a kind of a funnel. You might start this process and realize that like, nope, I don't want X role, or I don't want to be working in this industry. This sounds horrible. And then you just start the process again. And you think like, okay, like, you know, let's look at the environmental sector and like, you know, what companies are working in the environmental sector and what roles. And you have, over time, you'll just learn a lot. And like often through talking to people, you can understand what organizations are actually looking for, or kind of, you know, what problems they're facing that you could perhaps help solve. So again, long-winded, but
amazing. I think that's a great two-part, mentioning the importance of the company, but then also the civic role in the company and finding that's perfect balance for you.
Yeah, I think that also like as a student, or I can remember earlier in my career just being, you know, you want a job so bad. And it's so scary to think about like, will anybody hire me? And so I think that you kind of go into the job search interaction with, from a place of fear and like scarcity. And I think that really reframing it to yourself and realizing that like employers really want to hire you. Like you are like adding value to them and they are looking for people with your skill sets. And so instead of focusing on yourself as an applicant, like what I think is really helpful is to figure out like, what are this company or this, you know, manager, like what are their specific pain points and how can I solve their problems? And then when you go into the interview, like having it be more of a focus of, you know, like I deeply understand what challenges your organization is facing, which you will learn from all of your, you know, networking efforts, and then have prepared like, and this is how my skill set directly will solve those problems. And so like, and now having been on the other side of things and have the, you know, I've hired and interviewed a lot of people. If you can successfully do that, like done, you're hired. Like people are really thrilled. Like, you always want to find people that can help solve your problems.
Great. I think that reframing is super helpful for me to hear as someone who's definitely trying to find a job and a little bit nervous about what my future postgraduate plans will look like. I think that it's really great to hear advice from someone like you who's gone through that process.
Yeah, and I trust you. I've totally been there, and it is scary, and I know that not everybody has the luxury to do this, but I think the other piece of advice is just like be patient and take your time with it. Like I know that, because the thing is you don't necessarily want to be in a job for less than a year as you're trying to kind of build your skill set and your resume and stuff. So if it takes you 3 months to find a job that's going to be a really good fit for you, that you'll be happy to stay at, like it's worth it, as opposed to like maybe the first job you land, like you're offered, if it's not something that's like quite right, if you take it, then you're kind of stuck in it, at least for 6 months or a while. So I know that like in the moment it feels so scary and painful to like be waiting it out, and like there's so much uncertainty, but if you can find something that you're really excited about, it's so worth it. And like over the course of your life, those couple of months will be just a blip, but when you're in it, it feels just so terrifying.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kat. I think that was super useful closing advice. I have a brief closing segment, but if there's any last things that you wanted to add to this, I'm sure that all of the listeners, and myself included, would be great to hear any last pieces of advice.
I think like closing advice is just, it's okay to, there are lots of amazing, interesting things that are going on, especially in the data analytics space. And there's a ton of different ways to be involved at a bunch of different types of organizations. So I would encourage people to like be creative. Like you don't just have to go work at a tech company. You can use data analytics at a nonprofit or in research, and in a bunch of different capacities. And like, yeah, don't be afraid. Within the space, there's a bunch of different angles that you can target it from. So don't be afraid to pivot and try different things. And yeah, it's an exciting time.
Amazing. Thank you. So Kat, once again, I wanted to thank you for your engagement with us in helping students prepare for first career destinations.
Yeah, happy. It was really fun. Thank you for listening.
So this concludes this episode of the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations and other episodes in this series that are out there. I also want to encourage you to tune into other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website, or go to the CCI because sometimes they have amazing coupons for free snacks in town. And thank you again for watching. Goodbye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.